Hey guys, this is a review for End of Watch by Stephen King, third and final book in his first ever trilogy, the Bill Hodges trilogy. And actually, to keep this review as spoiler-free as possible for all three books, I won't talk much about the story of this one specifically, seeing it's the third and it'd be easy to spoil stuff. Really, this review will have to be my kind of overall feelings towards the trilogy as a whole. And these focus mainly on a character called Bill Hodges, a retired police detective turned private investigator whom, a year before he retired, began investigating an incident where someone drove a Mercedes into a crowd of people at a job fair. He was unable to solve that case before retiring and was in a deep depression about that. He's been contemplating suicide, but begins to get messages from Mr. Mercedes, the killer at the job fair, which reinvigorate his will to live and his need to find the killer. So that's the setup of the first book. We follow both Bill and Mr. Mercedes himself as they attempt to get to one another. This is its own self-contained story for the most part. And the second book, Finders Keepers, veers from this a bit and spends about a third of it focused on a completely different story, separate from Bill, and then kind of brings Bill in a little bit later. That first third of Finders Keepers may actually be my favorite part of this trilogy, but more on why that is in a minute. Overall, the story, though, it feels kind of disconnected from the other two and doesn't really add much to the overall storyline. And this final book goes back to feeling like an actual continuation on Mr. Mercedes, but with a new, altogether not too surprising supernatural twist. I mean, this is Stephen King, and I knew it had to come in somewhere. This one added a touch of the unreal, and it ultimately made it a little bit more interesting, in my opinion. Here's the thing, though. If you've watched any of my videos before now, you know I'm a huge Stephen King fanboy. He's my favorite and has been for a long time. But I'm not the biggest fan of these. They feel a bit like cardboard cutouts of Stephen King's other work, and that's mostly to just say they're not for me. They're not really my cup of tea. I know a lot of other people really enjoy them, but to me they're a bit hollow and unfocused and undeveloped, and in the case of the second book, just completely and entirely unnecessary. So I've already said my full thoughts on both the first and second books. I did a full review on Mr. Mercedes and talked about my problems with the Finders Keepers in a wrap-up I did last year. Bringing it back to this book, I have a hard time deciding what the point of this book really is, what the point of making this a trilogy was, because I think it suffered a lot from that attempt. This book, thinking back on it, is a bit of a rehashing of the first book, but with more than a hint of the supernatural mixed in. It's the same kind of cat and mouse, mano a mano story that we saw in the first book. I personally found this book to be more interesting, but was it really needed? And I'm also just not a big fan of the whole cat and mouse thing. I mean, seeing into the mind and life of Mr. Mercedes is pretty chilling, but it feels so lacking in suspense and in intrigue, despite being a thriller novel, because there's no mystery to anything. We get to see both sides, so there's hardly any surprises of actual problem solving on the part of the reader. And others are into that, but I would have preferred a more mystery-driven detective story. I'd love to see Stephen King try and write that. The addition of the supernatural in this book makes the story more interesting, yes, but it also feels super out of place. It's conflicting. On one hand, there's no reason for Stephen King not to put something like that in one of his books, and it's not terribly jarring for that reason, but on the other hand, if you took it out, this story would literally be almost exactly the same as the first book plot-wise. The best thing about this being what it is, it does a much better job of fleshing out its characters and making them feel like real people. In the first two books, the second one especially, there was just nothing there behind each character. Nothing behind their words, their actions. They all felt like the same person with a different label on them. Especially in Finders Keepers, Bill Hodges hardly exists as a person. He says some things, does some things, but there's no personality present in what he does. And I honestly have a hard time thinking about right now like who or what Bill Hodges is as a person. The dialogue doesn't come from him or any of the characters, not naturally. It's stiff and it's forced, and it doesn't really help to make me feel anything for the situations they'd found themselves in. And End of Watch does do a better job of turning these characters into actual characters. I actually felt something for them this time around, had an investment in them and what happened to them. It's lacking in other ways. Stephen King's usually a great grasp of cultural references and his ability to ground things in the real world of some sort, totally missing, for example, as he uses references and language and slang in this that are just cringeworthy to say the least. But it was the funnest to read out of all of them, and it had me turning the pages more so than the other two, and I appreciated that. Overall, though, I'm just not too impressed by this trilogy. I think a lot of what Stephen King is best at is missing here, or feels like a caricature or a shadow of what I know he can do as a writer. End of Watch is definitely best of the three, so I highly suggest finishing it if you've already started with the trilogy, but there's other better Stephen King novels out there, and I urge you to go experience those if you haven't yet. So that is my full review on End of Watch. I was sent this by the publisher. Scribner sent me this, and it's beautiful. I really like the way it looks. It really goes with the other ones, and I'm really happy that I was able to get a copy of it from the publisher. It's really nice of them, and I felt really special getting it. It's the very first Stephen King advanced reader's copy I've gotten. So that's it. That's my whole thoughts on pretty much the trilogy as a whole. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you've read these, let me know what you thought about them, and I'll see you later with more.